Wenn du bereit bist, echtes Vermögen aufzubauen, abonniere den Kanal und kommentiere langfristig, um Teil unserer Community zu werden. Wenn du bereit bist, echtes Vermögen aufzubauen, abonniere den Kanal und kommentiere langfristig, um Teil unserer Community zu werden.
Most people chase money, but true prosperity is built on a foundation that cannot be shaken. Today, we dive into James Allen's timeless masterpiece, 8 Pillars of Prosperity. You will learn why moral character is the only real path to lasting wealth and how to master the 8 essential qualities that guarantee a life of abundance. Stay tuned until the final chapter to transform your mindset. Most people chase money, but true prosperity is built on a foundation that cannot be shaken. Today, we dive into James Allen's timeless masterpiece, 8 Pillars of Prosperity. You will learn why moral character is the only real path to lasting wealth and how to master the 8 essential qualities that guarantee a life of abundance. Stay tuned until the final chapter to transform your mindset. Overton College. E-text prepared by Sigal Alon, Verity White, and the Project Gutenberg online distributed proofreading team, https://www.pgdp.net/. Note, Project Gutenberg also has an HTML version of this file, which includes the original illustrations. See 17988-h.htm or 17988-h.zip. https://www.gutenberg.org/dears/17988-h/17988-h.htm or https://gutenberg.org/dears/17988/8/17988-h.zip. Grace Harlowe's First Year at Overton College by Jessie Graham Flower, AM author of the Grace Harlowe High School Girls series. Grace Harlowe's second year at Overton College, Grace Harlowe's third year at Overton College, Grace Harlowe's fourth year at Overton College. Philadelphia Henry Altimus Company. Copyright 1914 by Howard E. Altimus. Do you remember what you said one October day last year, Grace, when we stood on this platform and said goodbye to the boys? Asked Anne Pearson. No, what did I say? Asked Grace Harlowe, turning to her friend Anne. You said, returned Anne, that when it came your turn to go to college, you were going to slip away quietly, without saying goodbye to anyone but your mother. And here you are with almost half Oakdale at the train to see you off to college. Now, Anne, you know perfectly well that people are down here to see you and Miriam too, laughed Grace. I'm not half as much of a celebrity as you are. Grace Harlowe, Miriam Nesbitt, and Anne Pearson stood on the station platform, completely surrounded by their many friends, who, regardless of the fact that it was 7:30 in the morning, had made it a point to be at the station to wish them Godspeed. This is the second public gathering this week, remarked Miriam Nesbitt, who, despite the chatter that was going on around her, had heard Grace's laughing remark. I know it, agreed Grace. There was just as large a crowd here when Nora and Jessica went away last Monday. Doesn't it seem dreadful that we are obliged to be separated? How I hated to see the girls go. And we won't be together again until Christmas. Oh, here come the boys, announced Eva Allen, who, with Marion Barber, had been standing a little to one side of the 3 girls. At this juncture, 4 smiling young men hurried through the crowd of young people and straight to the circle surrounding the 3 girls, where they were received with cries of, "We were afraid you'd be too late," and "Why didn't you get here earlier?" "We're awfully sorry," exclaimed David Nesbitt. "We had to wait for Hippie. He overslept as usual. We threw as much as a shovelful of gravel against his window, but he never stirred. Finally, we had to waken his family, and it took all of them to waken him." "Don't you believe what David Nesbitt says?" retorted Hippie. "Do you suppose I slept a wink last night, knowing that the friends of my youth were about to leave me?" Hippie sniffed dolefully and buried his face in his handkerchief. Now, Hippie," protested Miriam, "if you insist on shedding crocodile tears, although I don't believe you could be sad long enough to shed even that kind, we shall feel that you are glad to get rid of us." "Never," ejaculated Hippie fervently. "Oh, if I only had Irish Nora here to stand up for me. She wouldn't allow anyone, except herself, to speak harsh and cruel words to me." "We shan't be able to speak many more words of any kind to you," said Miriam, consulting her watch. "The train is due in 10 minutes. When Grace Harlow and her 3 dear friends, Nora O'Malley, Jessica Bright and Anne Pearson, began to make history for themselves in their freshman year at Oakdale High School, none of them could possibly imagine just how dear they were to become to the hearts of the hundreds of girls who made their acquaintance in Grace Harlow's plebe year at high school. The story of their freshman year was one of manifold trials and triumphs. It was at the beginning of that year that Grace Harlow had championed the cause of Anne Pearson, a newcomer in Oakdale. Then and there, a friendship sprang up between the two girls that was destined to be lifelong. The repeated efforts of several malicious girls to discredit Anne in the eyes of her teachers, and her final triumph in winning the freshman prize offered to the class by Mrs. Gray, a wealthy resident of Oakdale, made the narrative one of interest and aroused a desire on the part of the reader to know more of Grace Harlow and her friends. In Grace Harlow's sophomore year at high school, the girl chums appeared as basketball enthusiasts. In this volume was related the efforts of Julia Crosby, a disagreeable junior, and Miriam Nesbitt, a disgruntled sophomore, to disgrace Anne and wrest the basketball captaincy from Grace. Through the magnanimity of Grace Harlow, Miriam and Julia were brought to a realization of their own faults, and in time became the faithful friends of both Anne and Grace. During Grace Harlow's junior year at high school, the famous sorority, the Phi Sigma Tau, was organized by the 4 chums for the purpose of looking after high school girls who stood in need of assistance. In that volume, Eleanor Savelli, the self-willed daughter of an Italian violin virtuoso, made her appearance. The difficulties Grace and her chums encountered in trying to befriend Eleanor and her final contemptuous repudiation of their friendship made absorbing reading for those interested in following the fortunes of the Oakdale High School girls. Their senior year was perhaps the most eventful of all. At the very beginning of the fall term, the high school gymnasium was destroyed by fire. Failing to secure an appropriation from either the town or state, the 4 classes of the girls' high school pledged themselves to raise the amount of money required to rebuild the gymnasium. In Grace Harlow's senior year at high school, the story of the senior class bazaar, the daring theft of their hard-earned money before the bazaar had closed, and Grace Harlow's final recovery of the stolen money under the strangest of circumstances, furnished material for a narrative of particular interest. After graduation, the 4 chums, accompanied by their nearest and dearest friends, had spent a long and delightful summer in Europe. On returning to Oakdale, the real parting of the ways had come, for Nora and Jessica had already departed for an eastern city to enter a well-known conservatory of music. Marion Barber and Eva Allen were to enter Smith College the following week, Eleanor Savelli had long since sailed for Italy, and now the morning train was to bear Miriam Nesbit, Grace Harlow and Anne Pearson to Overton, an Eastern college finally decided upon by the three girls. Last year we left you on the station platform, gazing mournfully after the train that bore me away from Oakdale, remarked Hippy reminiscently. How embarrassed I felt at so much attention, and yet how sweet it was to know that you had gathered here, not to see David Nesbit, Reddy Brooks, Tom Gray, or any such insignificant persons off to school, but that I, Theophilus Hippopotamus Wingate, was the object of your tender solicitations. I expected it, groaned David. I don't see why we ever woke him up and dragged him along. As I was about to say when rudely interrupted, continued Hippy calmly, I shall miss you, of course, but not half so much as you will miss me. I hope you will think of me, and you may write to me occasionally if it will be a satisfaction to you. I know you will not forget me. Who, having once met me, could forget? Hippy folded his arms across his chest and looked languishingly at the three girls. A chorus of giggles from those grouped around the girls and derisive groans from the boys greeted Hippy's sentimental speech. Suddenly a long, shrill whistle was heard. "That's your train, girls," said Mr. Harlow, who with Mrs. Harlow, Mrs. Nesbit, and Mary Pearson had drawn a little to one side, while their dear ones said their last farewells to their four boy friends. The circle about the three girls closed in. The air resounded with goodbyes. The last kisses and handshakes were exchanged. Reckless promises to send letters and postcards were made. Then, still surrounded, Grace, Miriam, and Anne made their way to the car steps and into the train. Grace clung first to her mother, then to her father. "How can I do without you?" she said over and over again. Tears stood in her grey eyes. She winked them back bravely. "I'm going to show both of you just how much I appreciate going to college by doing my very best," she whispered. Her father patted her reassuringly on the shoulder, while her mother gave her a last loving kiss. "I know you will, dear child," she said affectionately. "Remember, Grace," added her father, a suspicious mist in his own eyes, "you are not to rush headlong into things. You are to do a great deal of looking before you even make up your mind to leap." "I'll remember, father. Truly I will," responded Grace, her face sobering. "All aboard! All aboard!" shouted the conductor. Those who had entered the train to say farewell left it hurriedly. "Goodbye, goodbye," cried Grace, leaning out the car window. From the platform as the train moved off, clear on the air, rose the Oakdale High School yell. "It's in honor of us," said Grace softly. "Dear old Oakdale, I wonder if we can ever like college as well as we have high school." For the first half hour, the three girls were silent. Each sat wrapped in her own thoughts, and those thoughts centered upon the dear ones left behind. Anne, whose venture into the theatrical world had necessitated her frequent absence from home, felt the wrench less than did Grace or Miriam. Aside from their summer vacations, they had never been away from their mothers for any length of time. To Grace, as she watched the landscape flit by, the thought of the ever-widening distance between her and her mother was intolerable. She experienced a strong desire to bury her face in her hands and sob disconsolately, but bravely conquering the sense of loneliness that swept over her, she threw back her shoulders and, sitting very straight in her seat, glanced almost defiantly about her. "Well, Grace, have you made up your mind to be resigned?" asked Miriam Nesbit. That sudden world-defying glance that you just favored us with looks as though the victory was won." "Miriam, you are almost a mind reader," laughed Grace. "I've been on the verge of a breakdown ever since we left Oakdale, and in this very instant I made up my mind to be brave and not cry a single tear. Look at Anne. She is as calm and unemotional as a statue." "That's because I'm more used to being away from home," replied Anne. "Troopers are not supposed to have feelings. With them, it is here today and gone tomorrow." "Yes, but you were transplanted to Oakdale soil for 4 years," reminded Grace. "I know it," returned Anne reflectively. "I do feel dreadfully sad at leaving my mother and sister too. Still, when I think that I'm actually on the way to college at last, I can't help feeling happy too." "Dear little Anne," smiled Grace, "college means everything to you, doesn't it? That's because you've earned every cent of your college money. And I'll have to earn a great deal more to see me through to graduation," added Anne soberly. "My vacations hereafter must be spent in work instead of play." "What are you going to do to earn money during vacations, Anne?" asked Miriam rather curiously. "I might as well confess to you girls that I'm going to do the work I can do most successfully," said Anne in a low voice. "I'm going to try to get an engagement in a stock theatrical company every summer until I graduate. I can earn far more money at that than doing clerical work. I received a long letter from Mr. Southard last week and also one from his sister. They wish me to come to New York as soon as my freshman year at college is over. Mr. Southard writes that he can get an engagement for me in a stock company. I'll have to work frightfully hard, for there will be a matinee every day as well as a regular performance every night, and I'll have a new part to study each week. But the salary will more than compensate me for my work. You know that Mary did dressmaking and worked night and day to send me to high school. Of course, my $5 a week from Mrs. Gray helped a great deal, but up to the time Mr. Southard sent for me to go to New York City to play Rosalind, I didn't really think of college as at all certain. Before I left New York for Oakdale, Miss Southard and I had a long talk. They made me see that it was right to use the talent God had given me by appearing in worthy plays. Mr. Southard pointed out the fact that I could earn enough money by playing in stock companies in the summer to put me through college and at the same time contribute liberally to my mother's support. The home problem was really the greatest to be solved. I felt that it wouldn't be right for me to even work my way through college and leave Mary to struggle on alone after she had worked so hard to help me get a high school education. So the stage seemed to be my one way out after all. And when once I had definitely decided to do as Mr. Southard recommended me to do, I was happier than I had been for ages. "Anne Pearson, you quiet little mouse," exclaimed Grace. "Why didn't you tell us all this before? You are the most provoking Anne under the sun. Here I've been worrying about you having to wait on table or do tutoring and odds and ends of work to put yourself through college, while all the time you were planning something different. We all know you're too proud to let any of your friends help you, but since you are determined to make your own way, I'm glad that you have chosen the stage after all." "I think you are wise, Anne," agreed Miriam. "With two such people as Mr. Southard and his sister to look after you, there can be no objection to your following your profession." "I am glad to know that you girls look at the matter in that light," replied Anne. "Suppose we had offered any objections?" asked Grace. "I'll answer that question," said Miriam. "Anne would have followed the path she had marked out for herself, regardless of our objections. Am I right, Anne?" "I don't know," said Anne, flushing deeply. "You have all been so good to me. I couldn't bear to displease my dearest friends, but it would be hard to give up something I knew could result in nothing save good for me. Anne paused and looked at Grace and Miriam with pleading eyes. "Never mind, dear," comforted Grace. "We approve of you and all your works. We are not shocked because you are a genius. We are sworn advocates of the stage and only too glad to know that it has opened the way to college for you." "Shall you let the fact that you have appeared professionally be known at Overton?" asked Miriam. "I shall make no secret of it," returned Anne quietly, "but I won't volunteer any information concerning it." "I wonder what our freshman year at Overton will bring us," mused Grace. "I have read so many stories about college life, and yet so far Overton seems like an unknown land that we are about to explore. From all I have heard and read, exploring freshmen find their first term at college anything but a bed of roses. They are sometimes hazed unmercifully by the upper classes, and their only salvation lies in silently standing the test. Julia Crosby says that she had all sorts of tricks played on her during her first term at Smith. Now she's a sophomore and can make life miserable for the freshmen. I am going to try to cultivate the true college spirit," concluded Grace earnestly. "College is going to mean even more to me than high school. I don't imagine it's all going to be plain sailing. I suppose more than once I'll wish myself back in Oakdale, but I'm going to make up my mind to take the bitter with the sweet and set everything down under the head of experience." "To tell you the truth," Miriam said slowly, "I am not enthusiastic over college. I value it as a means of continuing my education, and I'll try to live up to college ideals. But I'm not going to let anyone walk over me or ridicule me. I'm willing to live and let live. But, as Eleanor Savelli used to say, when in a towering rage, no one can trample upon me with impunity." "I wonder when we shall see Eleanor again," said Anne, smiling a little at the recollection called up by Miriam's quotation. "That reminds me," exclaimed Grace, "I have a letter from Eleanor that I haven't opened. It came this morning just before I left the house." Fumbling in her bag, Grace drew forth a bulky-looking letter, bearing a foreign postmark, and tearing open the end, drew out several closely folded sheets of thin paper covered with Eleanor's characteristic handwriting. "Shall I read it aloud?" asked Grace. "By all means," said Miriam with emphasis. Grace began to read. Anne, who sat beside her, looked over her shoulder, while Miriam, who sat opposite Grace, leaned forward in order to catch every word. They were so completely occupied with their own affairs, none of them noticed that the train had stopped. Suddenly a voice shrilled out impatiently, "Is this seat engaged?" With one accord, the three girls glanced up. Before them stood a tall, rather stout young woman with a full red face, whose frowning expression was anything but reassuring. "Yes. No, I mean," replied Grace hastily. "I thought not," remarked the stranger complacently as she stolidly seated herself beside Miriam and deposited a traveling bag partly on the floor and partly on Grace's feet. "These seats are ridiculously small," grumbled the stranger, bending over to jam her traveling bag more firmly into the space from which Grace had hastily withdrawn her feet. Then, straightening up suddenly, her heavily plumed hat collided with the hand in which Grace held Eleanor's letter, scattering the sheets in every direction. With a little cry of concern, Grace sprang to her feet and, stepping out in the aisle, began to pick them up. Having recovered the last one, she turned to her seat, only to find it occupied by their unwelcome fellow traveler. "I changed seats," commented the stout girl stolidly. "I never could stand it to ride backwards." Grace looked first at the stranger, then from Miriam to Anne. Miriam looked ready for battle, while even mild little Anne glared resentfully at the rude newcomer. Grace hesitated, opened her mouth as though about to speak, then without saying a word sat down in the vacant place and began to rearrange the sheets of her letter. "I'll finish this some other time, girls," she said briefly. "Oh, you needn't mind me," calmly remarked the stranger. "I don't mind listening to letters. That is if they've got anything in them besides, I write these few lines to tell you that I am well and hope you are the same. That sort of stuff makes me sick. Goodness knows, I suppose that's the kind I'll have handed to me all year. Neither Ma nor Pa can write a letter that sounds like anything." By this time, Miriam's frown had begun to disappear, while Anne's eyes were dancing. Grace looked at the stout girl rather curiously, an expression of new interest dawning in her eyes. "Are you going to college?" she asked. "Well, I rather guess I am," was the quick reply. "I'll bet you girls are in the same boat with me, too. What college do you get off at?" "Overton," answered Grace. "Then you haven't seen the last of me," assured the stranger, "for I'm going there myself, and I'd just about as soon go to darkest Africa or any other heathen place." "Why don't you wish to go to Overton?" asked Anne. "Because I don't want to go to college at all," was the blunt answer. "I want to go to Europe with Ma and Pa and have a good time. We have loads of money, but what good does that do me if I can't get a chance to spend it? I'd fail in all my exams if I dared, but Pa knows I'm not a wooden head, and I'd just have to try it again somewhere else, so I'll have to let well enough alone or get in deeper than I am now." The stout girl leaned back in her seat and surveyed the trio of girls through half-closed eyes. "Where did you girls come from, and what are your names?" she asked abruptly. "Partners in misery might as well get acquainted, you know." Grace introduced her friends in turn, then said, "My name is Grace Harlow, and we three girls live in the city of Oakdale." "Never heard of it," yawned the girl. "It must be like Fairview, our town, not down on the map. We live there because Ma was born there and thinks it the only place on earth. But we manage to go to New York occasionally, thank goodness." "Ever been there?" she queried. "Once or twice," smiled Miriam Nesbit. "Great old town, isn't it?" remarked their new acquaintance. "My name is J. Elfrida Briggs. The J stands for Josephine, but I hate it. Ma and Pa call me Fred, and that sounds pretty good to me. Say, aren't you girls about starved? I'm going to hunt the dining car and buy food. I haven't had anything to eat since 8 o'clock this morning." J. Elfrida rose hurriedly and, stumbling over her bag and Grace's feet, landed in the aisle with more speed than elegance. "You'd better come along," she advised. "They serve good meals on this train. Besides, I don't want to eat alone." With that, she stalked down the aisle and into the car ahead. "It looks as though we were to have plenty of entertainment for the rest of our journey," remarked Anne. "I prefer not to be entertained," averred Miriam dryly. "Personally, I am far from impressed with J. Elfrida. She strikes me as being entirely too fond of her own comfort. Now that she has vacated your seat, you had better take it, Grace, before she comes back." Grace shook her head. "I don't dislike riding backward," she said, "if you don't mind having her sit beside you. Perhaps someone will leave the train by the time she comes back. Then she will leave us." "No such good fortune," retorted Miriam. "She prefers our society to none at all. I think her advice about luncheon isn't so bad, though. Suppose we follow it." 5 minutes later, the three girls repaired to the dining car and seated themselves at a table directly across the aisle from their new acquaintance. J. Elfrida sat toying with her knife and fork, an impatient frown on her smug face. "These people are the limit," she grumbled. "It takes forever to get anything to eat. If I'd ordered it yesterday, I'd have some hopes of getting it today." Then, apparently forgetting the existence of the three girls, she sat with eyes fixed hungrily on the door through which her waiter was momentarily expected to pass. By the time that the chums had given their order to another waiter, J. Elfrida's luncheon was served, and she devoted herself assiduously to it. When Grace and her friend had finished luncheon, however, the stout girls still sat with elbows on the table, waiting for a second order of dessert. "Good gracious," remarked Miriam, as they made their way back to their seats. "No wonder J. Elfrida is stout. I suppose I shouldn't refer to her, even behind her back, in such familiar terms. But nothing else suits her. I'm not charitable like you, Grace. I haven't the patience to look for the good in tiresome people like her. I think she's greedy and selfish and ill-bred, and I wouldn't care to live in the same house with her." "You're a very disagreeable person, Miriam, in your own estimation," laughed Grace. "But fortunately, we don't take you at your own valuation, do we, Anne?" "Miriam's a dear," said Anne promptly. "She always pretends she's a dragon and then behaves like a lamb." "What time is our train due at Overton?" asked Miriam, ignoring Anne's assertion. "We are scheduled to arrive at Overton at 5 o'clock, answered Grace. "I wish it were 5 now. I'm anxious to see Overton College in broad daylight." At this juncture, J. Elfrida made her appearance, and sinking into the seat, declared with a yawn that she was too sleepy for any use. "I'm going to sleep," she announced. "You girls can talk if you don't make too much noise. Loud talking always keeps me awake. You may call me when we get to Overton." With these words, she bent over her bag, opened it, and drew out a small down cushion. She rose in her seat, removed her hat, and poking it into the rack above her head, sat down. Arranging her pillow to her complete satisfaction, she rested her head against it, closed her eyes, and within 5 minutes was oblivious to the world. The three travellers obligingly lowered their voices, conversing in low tones as the train whirled them toward their destination. Their hearts were with those they had left, and as the afternoon began to wane, one by one they fell silent and became wrapped in their own thoughts. Grace was already beginning to experience a dreadful feeling of depression, which she knew to be homesickness. It was just the time in the afternoon when she and her mother usually sat on their wide, shady porch, talking or reading as they waited for her father to come home to dinner. And a lump rose in her throat as she thought sadly of how long it would be before she saw her dear ones again. Far from being homesick, self-reliant Miriam was calmly speculating as to what college would bring her, while Anne, who had quite forgotten her own problems, sat eyeing Grace affectionately and wondering how soon her friend would make her personality felt in the little world which she was about to enter. And J. Elfrida Briggs of Fairview slept peacefully on,